June 1944. England is swollen with invasion. Every road near the coast is jammed with trucks under canvas. Every hedgerow hides a gun. Every barn is full of crates with grease still warm from the factory. And in the middle of all that controlled chaos, there's a locked room where no one jokes. Not the generals, not the map officers, not the code clerks with ink on their cuffs. Because in that room, on that table, is the single most dangerous piece of paper in Europe. A map, not a speech, not an order, not a plan. A map, a German map, pulled off a dead man in France, smuggled out, analyzed, translated, triple-checked, and then carried, by hand, under guard, to a group of people who are planning the largest amphibious invasion in human history. And when they open it and flatten it and really see what it's telling them, you can feel the air in the room change. It's not dramatic. There's no shouting. It's quieter than that. It's the quiet of realization. It's the quiet of, we have been guessing. Now we don't have to guess. Let's sit in that room for a second, because this is where it starts. You've got senior Allied planners, American, British, Canadian, huddled around a long table. The walls are covered in coastal silhouettes, tide tables, beach photographs taken by men in wetsuits at night, elevations, bunker sketches, estimates of German minefields, artillery arcs, field of fire projections, all of it. Months and months of reconnaissance, code breaking, aerial photography, French resistance reports, commando landings, submarine periscope shots. All of that is already in the room. And still there's uncertainty. There are gaps. There are places where the information doesn't agree. For example, exactly where are the German anti-tank ditches? Exactly which beaches are pre-sighted for artillery fire? Exactly where do the inland roads choke down into one narrow lane that a single knocked-out truck could block for hours? You don't get second chances on those questions. If you land in the wrong place, even by a few hundred yards, and you get funneled into a kill zone you didn't know about, that's not a statistic. That's thousands of men who don't see lunch. Now, into that tension walks a courier with a case. He unclasps it. Inside it, folded German field documents taken off a staff officer captured by resistance fighters in occupied France. Among them, a coastal defense map. Not propaganda, not rumor, not Allied speculation. A real working German defense map. Updated, marked, lived in. Not something from an atlas, something that had been on a German table, in active use, with pencil marks still denting the paper, where an officer pushed too hard. And when it's laid out, it's a shock, because the Germans have done exactly what the Allies feared most. They've built the coast into a machine. And now, thanks to this map, you can see every gear tooth. Let's talk about what's on that map. It shows beaches on the Norman coast drawn from the German point of view. It shows kill zones, exact overlapping arcs of machine gun fire, color-coded. It shows fixed artillery positions and mobile gun emplacements. Which ones are in reinforced concrete, which ones are just sandbag revetments. It shows seawall structures. It shows obstacles in the surf. But not just there are obstacles here. No, this map shows the types. Belgian gates, those huge metal frames that can rip open a landing craft. Hedgehogs, sharp steel caltrops meant to roll and flip and punch through a hull. Mines mounted on stakes. Rommel's asparagus sitting just below the waterline, waiting to break the back of anything that tries to ride a wave in. It shows where the tidal flats are too soft to support armor. It shows where exit ramps off the beach exist. And more importantly, it shows which of those exits have been pre-sighted for mortar fire. That last one makes a few hearts in that room beat a little faster, because every plan for D-Day hinges, absolutely hinges, on not staying on the beach. The mission isn't land and fight on the sand. That's suicide. The mission is land, survive the first 5 minutes, blow the exits, get off the sand, fan out, and start taking ground inland before the Germans can bring in their mobile reserves. If those exits are blocked, if armor can't get through, if infantry can't get up and over, if you're trapped in the open under machine gun and mortar fire, That beach becomes a graveyard. And this German map is telling them, in black pencil and red grease, we know where you have to go. We've cited those choke points. We're ready. That alone would make this document priceless. But there's something else, something worse. This map shows depth, not just the first line of bunkers and machine guns on the dunes. Depth. Strong points layered inland, pre-constructed fallback nests, reinforced farmhouses, walled yards, slit trenches in orchards. Inland anti-tank guns dug in and camouflaged at angles that don't even point at the sea. They point at the likely exits. Why does that matter? Because it tells Allied planners something they had not fully proven before this moment. The Atlantic Wall is not just a wall, it's a web. If you break through one strand, there's another, and another, and another, waiting 30 yards behind, 50 yards behind, one field over, at a crossroads in a hedgerow. That means even if you get off the beach, you're not safe. You're in a planned kill maze, which means you can't just send bodies forward and hope. You need a way to break the maze. And now we get to why this map, this one captured German map, actually rewires the Allied invasion plan. Not symbolically, literally. Here's the first change: engineering priority. Before this document, Allied planners obviously knew they'd need combat engineers. Men with Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in barbed wire. Men with explosives to blast open exits for tanks. Men who run forward under machine gun fire carrying satchel charges almost bigger than their torsos. But this map shows, beyond any reasonable doubt, that those engineers are not support. They're the tip of the spear. They have to go in first, not just on one beach, on all beaches, simultaneously, at multiple exit points, because the Germans have mined the exits and mapped the exits and built fire lanes into those exits. So if your engineers don't get there in the first wave, if they don't blast lanes through beach obstacles fast, then the entire rest of the invasion force piles up behind them, stalled, exposed, dying in rows. That is unacceptable. So overnight, the priority matrix shifts. Now the question is no longer, how fast can we get tanks ashore? Now it's, how fast can we get engineers ashore to clear the way for the tanks? And that seems like a detail. It's not. It changes loading orders for landing craft. It changes timing on who hits the beach at H hour. It changes survival odds, and it saves lives. Second change: targeting. The captured map identifies specific hardpoints, reinforced German strongpoints, that if left intact, will rake entire beaches with sustained machine gun fire. We're talking concrete resistance nests with interlocking MG-42s. And if you've ever heard recordings of an MG-42, you know that gun does not sound like a weapon. It sounds like a zipper opening the air. Those nests are numbered, labeled. The map gives grid references, and that means the Allied naval bombardment plan can shift from hit areas of the beach with heavy guns to hit these specific bunkers at these coordinates, at these times, with this weight of shell that is lethal, that is decisive. That is the difference between landing under 2 machine guns and landing under 20. And if you don't think that changes history, you haven't imagined standing in knee-deep water under fire, praying for one of those guns to just go quiet. Third change: beach selection. This one is huge. Allied planners were already evaluating multiple possible landing areas along the French coast. They're looking at Pas de Calais, the closest crossing from England, the obvious place heavily defended. They're looking at Normandy, less obvious, longer crossing, weaker defenses, maybe. This map, which includes German assumptions about likely landing sites and how they're defended, gives them confirmation on something they desperately needed proof for. Normandy is vulnerable, not undefended, never that, just less concentrated, less fully reinforced, less armored, less ready to throw panzer divisions into the surf in the first hour. Pas de Calais, heavily fortified, terrain flatter, beaches broader. Sounds good on paper, but the Germans expected it. It's crawling with heavy guns. It's watched. The map confirms it. Normandy? Bunkers, yes. Artillery, yes. Obstacles, yes. Mines, yes. Prepared exits covered by fire, yes. But the real tank-killing punch? The fast, armored counterattack that could drive the Allies back into the sea is farther away. That's everything. Because D-Day doesn't have to be easy. It just has to not be immediately impossible. And now, through German eyes, literally through German ink and German pencil, the Allied planners can see we can survive this here. Not it'll be fine. No one in that room thinks it'll be fine. They're all fully aware that thousands of men, maybe tens of thousands, may not make it off those beaches. But they can look at that German map and say a simple, terrible sentence. We can get ashore in Normandy. And that right there is the birth of what will become the 5 landing sectors you and I know by name: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. That's not a slogan. That's geography turned into blood math. Fourth change: air tasking. When you know where the German fallback positions are, not just on the shoreline, but inland a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, you can assign air power to hit those hard. Not just the obvious coastal guns, the depth, the second line, the in case they break through the sand line. Because if you don't neutralize that depth, here's what happens. Your infantry fights its way off the beach in absolute hell, finally gets behind the dunes, thinks, we made it, and then gets torn apart by an 88mm gun in a farmhouse that has perfect line of fire on the first paved road off the beach. That's how breakthroughs die. That's how momentum dies. That's how the Germans keep you pinned long enough to move reserves in from inland and crush you. So using this captured German mapping of inland positions, the Allies start retasking medium bombers and fighter bombers not just for the morning of the landing, but for the hours after. The job: hit those fallback nests before the first Allied boots even get near them. Break the second line before the first line is even done firing. That is brutally forward thinking. It's also something you can only even attempt if you know where those fallback nests are. Now they do. Fifth change: deception confidence. This one's subtle and it's delicious. The Allies are running one of the greatest deception operations in military history at this point. Fake radio traffic, fake army groups, inflatable tanks, double agents feeding lies straight into German high command. The whole performance is built to make the Germans believe the main invasion is coming at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. Why? Because if the Germans keep their heavy armor pointed at Calais and hesitate to send it to Normandy, the troops who land in Normandy get breathing space. Breathing space becomes beachheads. Beachheads become ports. Ports become invasion corridors. That's the whole war. Now here's where the captured map plays in. When Allied planners open that German map, they're not just looking at guns and mines. They're looking at the German mental model. What do they think we're going to do? Where are they most paranoid? Where did they fortify at maximum intensity? And where did they say, we'll reinforce later? It's like reading their fear. And what the Allies see in that map is this. The Germans are acting like Calais is the crown jewel. Normandy matters, yes. They've invested in it. But Calais looks like the front row seat to the apocalypse. Which means the lie is working. Which means keep pushing it. Keep selling Calais. Keep feeding that story. Keep them believing Normandy is second tier, a feint, a distraction. That knowledge and that validation gives the deception team the confidence to go even harder in the final weeks before D-Day. That's not trivia. That buys lives. That buys hours. And hours on June 6th are worth continents. Now I want to slow down and bring you into one specific moment, because this is where you really feel it. A British intelligence officer, young, sharp, with the kind of wire-tired focus you only get when you've been living in maps for months, is standing over that captured German map with a wax pencil. He's tracing in tiny arcs the reported fields of fire from certain machine gun nests and fixed gun emplacements. He's murmuring almost to himself, and everyone around him is just letting him talk, because what he's doing is terrifying. He's replaying the landing, the first 90 seconds, from the German point of view. He's saying, if we land here, they die. If we land here, they die. If we land here, they maybe live. If we land here, they live long enough to get to this dune line. If they get to this dune line, They're in dead ground from this bunker, but still exposed to this one here, here, and here. If that bunker is still up at H plus 5 minutes, that entire company is gone. And you can feel the math of it. He's not being dramatic. He's not emotional. He's clinical. He's assigning lifespans to landing sites in seconds. And he's doing it using the captured German data. That is the moment everyone in that room understands. This is no longer a staff exercise. This is no longer theory. This is real. We are in this room deciding who gets to live. That is the weight of a map. Let me say something hard out loud because it matters. D-Day was inevitable in concept. At some point, the Allies had to land in Western Europe and open that front. Germany wasn't going to give up. The Soviets were screaming for a second front. The U.S. industrial machine was at full speed. Britain had survived the worst and was still in the fight. The invasion was coming, but nothing about the execution was guaranteed. Nothing. D-Day could have been a catastrophe. If the landings had failed, if the first waves had been slaughtered on the sand, if armor never got off the beach, if the Germans had been able to rush panzer divisions in fast and crush those fragile beachheads, the war in Europe would have stretched, bled, shifted, maybe shattered. You could be looking at a different post-war map of Europe, even a different Cold War entirely. And I am not exaggerating, we're talking hinges in history. And one of the quietest hinges was a captured German map. You don't get drama points for that. It's not two guys with Tommy guns clearing a bunker. It's not a flag going up. It's not a general giving a speech. It's paper. It's pencil lines. It's grease marks. It's, this road is mined past this hedgerow. It's, this draw is covered by enfilade fire from this blockhouse. It's, this exit is wired for demolition. It's, this field is impassable to armor at high tide. It's information. And information in war is mercy, because information lets you change, and that's exactly what happens next. Allied commanders begin making adjustments that look tiny on a briefing slide. Swap landing craft sequence here. Shift this wave 200 meters down beach there. Assign this destroyer to knock out this gun at H2 minutes instead of H10 minutes. But those tiny changes are not tiny at all. They are life and death for entire units. They are literally you go here and live, instead of you go there and die. They are rewriting the first chapter of the invasion. And here's the part that hits like a punch when you think about it. The men who will land on those beaches will never know. Not then, not on the boats. They'll get last-minute briefings. When the ramp drops, move. Don't stop, stay low. Follow the tape. Engineers will have cleared lanes. Get to the seawall. Wait for the Bangalore teams. When they blow wire, push through. Do not bunch up in the exits. Do not stop in the exits. Keep moving inland. They'll be shown sand tables and aerial photos. They'll be told which farmhouse is actually a bunker. They'll be warned about the stakes with mines. But they will not be told. By the way, last week we got our hands on the German defensive map for this sector, and we shifted your landing point 300 yards because where you were originally supposed to run is, according to German machine gun arcs, a mathematically guaranteed kill zone. They won't be told that because they don't need to know that. They need to focus on surviving the first 10 meters. But you and I can say it. We can say it now. That captured map, that ugly, creased, smuggled, dirt-stained document, reached into the future, moved boats on the water, moved men on those boats, and pulled some of them out of paths where they were scheduled to die. That is not poetry. That is the job. That is planning at its most ruthless and most humane at the same time. And that's where we're going to pause this first part. Right here, in that locked room in England in late May, early June 1944, where a table full of exhausted planners, intelligence officers, engineers, gunnery experts, naval fire coordinators, and logistics men are all leaning over a stolen German map and realizing they have just been handed something priceless. Not an advantage, a preview of what the other side believes will happen when the first ramps drop. And if you can see that, if you can see what the enemy thinks you're about to walk into, you can walk differently. You can send different men first. You can hit different bunkers first. You can drag different artillery inland first. You can lie to them more convincingly in the places that matter. and you can hit them more brutally in the places that break. You can rewrite the opening seconds of the longest day. Because that's what this really is, the story of how stolen ink redrew destiny. In part 2, we're going to walk onto those beaches. We're going to see exactly how those pencil marks became targets, how those targets became explosions, how those explosions became gaps in wire, and how those gaps in wire became the crawl inland. And we're going to watch moment by moment whether the map was enough or whether even perfect knowledge still had to be paid for in blood. June 6, 1944. Dawn is still only an idea on the horizon. The water is black-blue, cold enough to make your bones feel hollow. The smell is oil, salt, exhaust, cordite, sickness. And on that water, packed shoulder to shoulder in landing craft that buck like angry animals, are men who have no idea that they're alive right now because of a pencil mark on a German map. They just know this. The ramp is going to drop, and when it drops, if you don't move, you die. That's it. That's the entire universe. Move or die. But you and I, we get to see the larger picture. We get to see what was decided in that locked room and how it hits the beach in real time. So let's pick a beach. Let's pick the one that almost didn't work. Omaha. Because Omaha is the place where even a good map, even perfect intelligence, even full preparation, still ran headfirst into physics, weather, fear, and murderous German math. And still, somehow, broke through. Omaha is that dangerous. It is a crescent of sand under high bluffs. It's cut with narrow draws, little valleys running from the beach inland. The Germans mined those draws, wired them, pre-sighted them, and then built machine gun nests on the high ground to rake the entrances. That means every logical exit off the sand is a shooting gallery. And here's the problem. The Americans have to get off that sand. They can't stay on the open, flat beach while the tide comes in and machine guns fire down from concrete bunkers that were poured and reinforced specifically to watch that exact strip of ground. If the Americans stall on Omaha, they die on Omaha. If they die on Omaha, there's no link-up with the British and Canadians from the east. If there's no link-up, the beachheads stay isolated. If the beachheads stay isolated long enough, the Germans can drive armored divisions in between and start pushing people back into the sea. That's not me being dramatic. That's the nightmare scenario. That's how you lose D-Day. So what do? You look at that captured German map and you make a call that sounds small and costs blood. You don't land where the enemy expects you. Let me explain what I mean. See, on paper, the obvious landing points at Omaha are right in front of the main exits. The draws where the roads go inland. It's clean. It's direct. You land, you run forward across the sand, you blow the wire at the road exit, you push up through the draw, and boom, you're inland. Except, that's also exactly what the Germans assumed you would do. So they pack those exits with barbed wire, mines, anti-tank ditches, concrete, layered machine guns, mortars, and overlapping preset fire. Those exits, here's where we'll go ashore spots, are death funnels. And the German map says so, in detail. So Allied planners looked at that and did something that looks, from the air, insane. They shifted certain waves sideways. They adjusted some landing points down the beach. They said, no, you're not hitting the road directly. You're coming in here, and here, and here. Then you're going to fight along the beach, not straight off of it, until you're past some of these worse fire lanes. Then, only then, you're going to hook up and force a gap. That's harder. That's uglier. That means longer exposure to fire. That means some units come ashore already off course on purpose. That means commanders on the ground have to improvise. But it also means you're avoiding the absolute densest German kill zones. That's not luck. That's ink. That's planning. That's the captured map in action. But here's the part that makes Omaha, Omaha. Even with that adjustment, the first waves come into hell. The naval bombardment, which was supposed to pulverize those German bunkers, in a lot of sectors, it doesn't. Some shells fall long, some guns lift fire too early, some targets, even with perfect coordinates, just survive because reinforced concrete, poured months in advance, is not polite. So when those ramps drop, a lot of German guns are still very much alive, and they are set up exactly the way the map said they would be, which means those first men splashing into water up to their chest with gear that weighs more than half their own body weight are running into reality, not theory. Machine guns open from the bluffs, a flat, ripping, metallic scream. Mortar rounds start walking down the tide line, hunting clumps of men, throwing sand and salt water and body into the air. Barbed wire waits at the high water mark like a fence built by a madman. Scattered metal obstacles stick up like broken ribs. There are mines on some of those obstacles rigged to detonate when a landing craft hits them, and you can feel in that instant how thin the plan is. This is the test. Did we read the map right? Did we brief this right? Did we choose the right spots to hit? Did we kill the right bunkers? Did we send the engineers in the right wave? Because if any one of those answers is no, then Omaha becomes a slaughter you don't come back from. And here's where you see, minute by minute, how that captured map saves the day. Not by making Omaha easy, but by making Omaha survivable. Watch what happens. The engineers, those support troops who were loaded first because of what that German map showed, they're already on the sand. They're already crawling. They're already cutting wire. They're already laying Bangalore torpedoes. Long tubes of explosives they shove under barbed wire and detonate to blow lanes open. They're doing this under direct machine gun fire. A lot of them die doing it. A lot. But enough of them live long enough to blast holes, and those holes become the only way off the killing ground. That's the first effect. Without that, everybody else dies stacked up behind the wire. Second effect. Because the map told Allied naval gunnery where the worst strong points were, exactly which concrete bunkers had to die or at least be stunned. You've got destroyers coming in dangerously close, in shallow water, to get line of sight and hammer those bunkers point blank. That was not in the original textbook. Warships are not supposed to nose into water that shallow, that close to shore, in range of coastal guns, and fire like shore artillery. But they do, because they have to, because the map gave them coordinates and said, that bunker, that one, right there, is killing men. Hit it, so they hit it. You can picture it. A destroyer so close to the beach, you can see individual sailors on deck without binoculars, pivoting its guns and just slamming round after round into a concrete position halfway up the bluff. Each hit throws smoke and white dust and concrete chips like bone fragments out of that gun slit. Sometimes the bunker survives anyway. Sometimes it doesn't. But when it doesn't, whole stretches of beach suddenly go quiet. And that quiet is life. Third effect. Because the map showed not just what's on the waterline, but what's waiting on the road behind the bluff. The first units that actually make it up and over aren't just told get inland. They're told there's going to be a machine gun in that farmhouse. There's going to be an anti-tank gun behind that stone wall. There's going to be an 88 covering that crossroads. Do not run past it. Kill it. That sounds small. It is not small. That's the difference between pushing forward and being shot in the spine from behind by something you didn't know existed. So, in the middle of total chaos, squad leaders and junior officers are landing, getting their bearings and barking things like, house left, 200 meters, that's a gun nest, take it out. Or stone wall at the road junction, that's an 88, get a charge on it. That's not guessing, that's not I think I saw something. That's I've been shown this exact thing on a sand table because it was drawn in German pencil on a German map, captured last week, copied yesterday, and briefed to me 4 hours ago on my troop transport. That is how you stay alive long enough to call yourself inland. Now I want to zoom in to one moment because this is how close it got. There is a point, mid-morning, Omaha sector, where a handful of Americans, not a division, not a regiment, not hundreds, a handful, have clawed their way up a bluff through a gap that was not supposed to be their main road. They're scratched, burned, shaking. Some of them dropped their rifles in the surf and are now fighting with whatever they can salvage. They've got a few demo charges, a few grenades, a few light machine guns, and behind them, down on the beach, there are still hundreds of men pinned down with no movement possible. If those handful of men on the bluff fail, if they're cut down, pushed back, pinned in place, then nobody comes off that stretch of sand. And if nobody comes off that stretch of sand, the whole landing in that sector collapses. That is how thin the thread was. What do those men do? They go bunker to bunker and knock them out from above and behind, which is to say, they don't charge the firing slit head-on from the beach, because that's suicide. That frontal arc is where all the German guns are pointed. Instead, they use what they were briefed on, where the trenches run, where the communication ditches are, where you can flank a position instead of die in front of it, and they move through that. They hit the bunkers from angles the Germans did not want to defend, because those angles were supposed to be impossible to reach. But they weren't impossible, they were just very, very expensive. That's the hinge. When that first bunker falls from behind, all the men on the beach in front of it stop dying quite as fast. When the second bunker falls, the whole firing line starts to flicker. When the third bunker falls, men down below start to stand up. When they stand up, they start moving. When they start moving, the beach stops being a killing zone and starts being a launch point. That's the moment Omaha tilts. And that's when you can finally say, we're not going back into the sea. Now let's be honest, that did not happen because of one map. That happened because of human beings doing almost suicidal work. Engineers crawling into fire, destroyer captains risking their ships in shallow water, infantry officers improvising on sand covered in smoke and bodies, medics working in open view under machine gun fire. Because if they didn't, no one else would get back up. It's people, always people. But those people walked into a nightmare with their eyes more open than they would have been without that captured German document. They weren't blind. They weren't guessing. They weren't walking into a maze without at least knowing where some of the walls were. And that matters. Because on D-Day, seconds mattered. Meters mattered. And knowing you were in advance, where the Germans had layered their fire, where the exits were wired, where the fallback nests waited, where the inland guns sat, where the second line really was, that cut the death bill. Not erased it. Cut it. Made it survivable. Made it breakable. Made it possible. And in Normandy, possible is victory. Now step off Omaha for a second and look at the bigger board. By midday, Allied beachheads, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword, are, in different shapes and with different wounds, becoming real. Utah goes relatively well. Paratroopers land scattered in the dark, improvise, take key bridges, and block German counterattacks. The landing force comes ashore slightly off target, but in this case, being off target is a gift. They come in on a slightly lighter defended stretch than planned and push inland fast. Gold and Sword, the British beaches, and Juneau, Canadian, all meet their own versions of hell, mines, fire, and seawalls. But they also benefit, just like Omaha, from the intel picture that says, this strong point must die first. This gun must be silenced. This road must be held. And here's the part the German map also helped deliver. The Germans hesitate. High command waits. They're not sure even hours into the day if Normandy is the real invasion. Because the deception campaign, the big fake army supposedly massing opposite Pas-de-Calais, the false radio traffic, the phantom commander, Patton, leading the phantom force, is still working. And that lie, reinforced by what the Germans already knew from their own assumptions we saw in that captured map, buys something priceless: time. Time for the Allies to unload more men, more tanks, more guns, more fuel, more ammunition. Time to push inland, link the beaches, and build a wall of their own. Time to turn a bunch of guys clinging to wet sand into a lodgment on the continent. Time to make the invasion irreversible. And the moment the invasion becomes irreversible, the clock changes. It's no longer, will the Allies get a foothold in France? It becomes, it's begun. Now, how fast can they expand? That's when the war in Western Europe starts its countdown. That's when the end of Nazi Germany stops being theory and becomes schedule. And inside that shift, inside that turn from if to when, is where you feel the weight of a single stolen map. You can trace a line from that German officer's briefcase to that courier under guard in England, to that locked room, to that wax pencil circling kill zones, to that destroyer captain taking his ship too close to shore, to that American engineer crawling with a Bangalore under wire at Omaha, to that first terrified kid using that blasted gap to sprint up the sand and live long enough to reach the dunes. That is not exaggeration. That is the chain. Now, I want to be fair to the men who never saw that room, because here's the other truth. You can have the best intelligence in the world and still bleed for every yard. And they did. They bled in salt water. They bled in sand. They bled in hedgerows, in ditches, in orchards, on roads so narrow a single burning truck could block an entire column. They bled in farm courtyards where German machine guns waited in haylofts. They bled under mortars in wheat fields they'd never heard of the day before. They bled carrying satchel charges that could kill them if they tripped. They bled dragging wounded friends to the lee side of a steel obstacle that was itself mined. They bled blowing gaps, then running through those gaps while the air was still full of splinters. They bled doing what the plan asked of them. And sometimes, even when they did everything right, they still didn't make it. That's the cost. That's the part any honest telling has to include. Because intelligence wins wars sounds clean. The truth is ugly. Intelligence makes fewer mothers get telegrams. That's what it does. It reduces the total. It doesn't erase the bill. There's a story, and it's one that gets told in quiet voices, about officers walking the beaches after the first day, after the smoke had thinned and the tide had come in and gone back out. They're looking at the bodies. They're looking at the wreckage of boats, gear, helmets, rifles, pieces of things that used to be machines and now look like scrap. And one of them supposedly says quietly, "If we had landed here without that targeting data, we'd still be floating in that water, face down." Is that exact quote recorded word for word? Number. But the sentiment is dead on. Without what the map revealed, the bunkers that had to die first, the wire that had to be cut first, the exits that had to be breached first, Omaha doesn't open. If Omaha doesn't open, those men are trapped on the beach until German reinforcements arrive. And if that happens, the whole invasion might stall, choke, drown. That's not drama. That's logistics plus German armor. And German armor in 1944 still means something. Instead, by the end of day one, there is a ragged, bleeding, stubborn Allied foothold in Normandy. Not pretty, not secure, not safe, but real. Real enough to start pouring men and tanks and fuel and guns into France, faster than the Germans can push them back out. Real enough that Hitler's Fortress Europe now has a hole in it you can drive a truck through. Real enough that, from this point on, the question for Germany is not can we win, but how long can we delay losing? That's the pivot. That's the hinge. And sitting right there, at the pivot, is that one captured German map. Let's step back from the blood and look at it like historians for a second. What does this whole story actually tell us? Here's what it tells us. Wars are not just decided by firepower, they're decided by information. And information, by itself, is useless unless someone is willing to act on it before it's comfortable. That German map, by itself, is just paper. German pencil grids on German paper. But in the right hands in time, with the nerve to make changes based on what it shows, it becomes a weapon. It becomes a shield. It becomes a life raft. And it becomes a judge. Because it forces commanders to say out loud, if we land them here, they die. If we land them here, some of them live. That's a brutal sentence. That's an inhuman sentence. But that's the sentence of war. And sometimes, it's the sentence that lets more men come home than otherwise would have. So yes, the first part of the story was about a table in England and a room full of planners staring at a stolen map and realizing the Atlantic Wall was a web, not a line. This second part is about what happens when that web meets fire and steel and will. It's about how even perfect knowledge isn't clean. It's about how even the best plan still gets chewed up by reality and has to be rebuilt in real time by 19-year-olds under fire. And it's about how, somehow, through all of that, the Allies still get off those beaches, still push inland, still link up, still drive, still turn maybe into, we are here. You want the ending? Here's the ending. By nightfall on June 6, 1944, there are American, British, and Canadian flags, and men wearing them on their sleeves, dug in on French soil, not as raiders, not as commandos, not as saboteurs, as an army, an occupying army, a permanent presence, something Hitler said would never happen, something German coastal commanders swore they were ready to stop, something entire German planning staff spent years preparing to prevent. And they failed. They failed because brave men did unforgivable things to stay alive for 5 more minutes. They failed because destroyers came in too close and fired point blank into concrete. They failed because engineers blew wire with their hands still on the charges. They failed because kids from Kansas and Glasgow and Montreal crawled up dirt that was exploding in their faces and kept going anyway. And they failed because a few days earlier, a courier brought a captured German map into a quiet room in England. And the people in that room had the courage to believe what it told them, to move men, to change timing, to rewrite who lived and who didn't. That map didn't win the war. People did. But that map helped those people make it to the first night. And from that first night forward, the war in Western Europe was on a countdown. The clock was now running against Berlin. So when you see those photos, those black and white shots of men crouched behind Czech hedgehogs on a Normandy beach, explosions throwing fountains of water into the air around them, helmets low, shoulders hunched, faces set. Remember this, you are not just looking at courage, you're looking at a decision someone made 2 days before. A decision based on lines on paper. A decision to move a landing point, retask a destroyer, bump an engineer platoon to the first wave, shift a timing code by 3 minutes. A decision that meant that man in that photo got to live long enough to be in that photo. That's the quiet part of victory. That's the part no monument can really carve in stone. That's the part you only hear if you lean in close. War is loud when it happens, but it's won, or lost, in very quiet rooms. By people looking at maps and daring to change the plan.